My parents never once said, I love you. And that quiet absence became the loudest voice in my life, teaching me everything about survival and nothing about feeling worthy inside. Hello, everyone. I'm Pat Sajak, and welcome back to Kitchen Table Talks, the show where we slow down, sit down, and talk honestly about the stories that shape who we are, just like we would around a real kitchen table. You just heard today's opening line. My parents never once said, I love you. And that quiet absence became the loudest voice in my life, teaching me everything about survival and nothing about feeling worthy inside. I'd like you to take a moment and let that sink in. For some of you, that sentence might feel distant. Maybe you grew up in a home where I love you was said every day on the way to school, before bed, at the end of every phone call. But there are others of you who heard that line and thought, that's me, that's my childhood, that's my house. Maybe your parents worked hard, they paid the bills, they made sure there was food on the table. They reminded you to study, to behave, to stay out of trouble. And yet, in the middle of all that effort, no one ever said, I love you. No one said, I'm proud of you. No one said, I'm glad you're here. So I want to ask you, wherever you are right now, if your parents never said, I love you, did you still feel loved? And if they did say it, did you always believe them? Tonight, we're going to talk about that gap between what is done and what is said, between providing and truly connecting, between being taken care of and actually feeling wanted. Our guest grew up in a home where everything looked fine from the outside. Two parents, routines, responsibilities, rules. But those three words were missing. Not on birthdays, not on holidays, not in passing, not even once. We're going to hear how that silence shaped her and how it still echoes in the way she relates to other people and to herself. So, let's begin. To our guest. When you think back to your childhood and to that sentence, my parents never once said, I love you, what actually happened? How did that reality first become clear to you?
Hello, Pat, and hello to everyone watching. My name is Emma Nguyen. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I was born and raised in a smaller town about a 3-hour drive from here, but Seattle is the place I chose to start over in both the literal and emotional sense. When you asked your question, Pat, the first thought that came to my mind was, honestly, nothing dramatic ever happened. There wasn't a huge screaming match. My parents didn't walk out on me. There was no physical abuse, no moment that anyone would label as a big tragedy. I grew up with both my mum and dad in the house. They both worked. They paid the bills on time. They showed up to most of my school events. From the outside, we looked like a pretty normal family. But if you ask me, when did you first realize your parents never said, I love you? I remember that moment very clearly. I was about 11 years old. I'd been invited to a classmate's house for a sleepover, just a regular, harmless weekend thing. Their house wasn't that different from mine. 2 stories, a kitchen, a TV, the smell of dinner drifting into the living room in the evening. But there was one thing that felt very different, the way they talked to each other. That night, my friend, her name was Chloe, and I were on the couch watching a movie. Her mum walked in and said, in this gentle voice, Girls, it's time to start getting ready for bed. Chloe groaned and said, Moom, 10 more minutes, please. I braced myself, because in my house that would usually trigger a pretty sharp response, something like, No, I said it's bedtime. But instead, her mum came a bit closer and said, so casually, I love you, but it's still bedtime. The way she said it was so normal, like she had said that exact sentence 1,000 times before, and Chloe didn't react like it was special or rare. She just rolled her eyes playfully and went, Okay, we're going. Meanwhile, I was sitting there thinking, wait, people say, I love you like that? Just in the middle of a normal sentence? On the drive home the next day, I was in the back seat while my dad was driving. I remember the radio was on some news station and the windows were a little foggy from the cold outside. I stared out at the road, but my mind was somewhere else completely. I started asking myself, okay, when was the last time my parents said, I love you to me? I scanned through my memory. Birthdays, Christmas, New Year's, my elementary school graduation, Days when I came home with good grades. Nothing. Not rarely, just never. That's when I began to connect the dots. My dad always asked, "Did you eat? Did you finish your homework?" My mum always left food out for me, did my laundry, checked my backpack before school. They did a lot of things right, but they never used the word love. The first feeling that hit me was not anger, it was shame. Shame, because if someone had asked me in that moment, "Do your parents ever tell you they love you?" I would have had to say no. It felt like my family was missing something basic that other families seem to have by default. After that, I started noticing it everywhere. On TV shows, I saw parents hugging their kids, saying "I love you." At other friends' houses, I heard things like "Love you, sweetie," or "I'm so proud of you." I realized that "I love you" wasn't just a movie line, it was part of everyday language for a lot of people. It just wasn't part of the language in my home. But the strange thing is, I didn't tell anyone how that made me feel. I didn't go home and ask, "Do you love me? Why don't you ever say it?" Instead, I had this conversation with myself that went something like, "They show it through actions. Don't be too demanding. Don't make things awkward. Other people have it worse. You should be grateful." Slowly, I developed a skill that I thought was maturity at the time, but now I know it was actually self-protection. I started lowering my expectations. I stopped hoping for hugs. I stopped expecting praise. I stopped imagining they'd ever say, "We're proud of you." I told myself, as long as no one is mad, no one is yelling, no one is leaving, then that's enough. That's how it began. The story of a child who never missed a meal, never lacked clothes or a place to sleep, but quietly, deeply missed 3 words she didn't even dare to admit she was starving for.
Emma, first of all, thank you for sharing that so honestly. I want to pause on something you said because I think a lot of people will recognize it. You didn't grow up in what most people would call a bad home. There wasn't a clear villain. There wasn't a dramatic scene you could point to and say, that's when everything broke. On paper, it all looked fine. 2 parents, food, a house, clothes, rides to school, bills paid. And yet, inside, there was this quiet ache, this missing piece that you couldn't name at 11 years old, only feel. You used the word shame, and I think that's powerful. Not anger, not outrage, but shame. Shame that if someone asked, "Do your parents ever tell you they love you?" your honest answer would have been no. Shame can be very sneaky. It doesn't yell, it whispers. It says, "Don't talk about this." It says, "Other people have it worse, so your pain doesn't count." It says, "If you want more, you're being ungrateful." And so you did what a lot of kids in that situation do. You adjusted. You lowered your expectations. You told yourself to be okay with less. You decided that as long as no one was yelling, as long as the lights stayed on and the fridge wasn't empty, that had to be enough. From the outside, that looks like a well-behaved, mature child. On the inside, it's a child quietly teaching herself, "My needs are big. My feelings are inconvenient. I should shrink them." And the thing about lessons we learn in childhood is that they rarely stay in childhood. They follow us. They show up later in friendships, in romantic relationships, at work, and especially in the way we talk to ourselves. So I want to acknowledge something clearly. What you went through is real. It doesn't have to look like a movie-style disaster to leave a mark. A lifetime of unspoken love is still a kind of wound. Now, hearing your story so far, I can see how this silence became the default setting in your life. No big explosion, no obvious crisis, just a constant, low-level message. "We will do things for you, but we will not say what you mean to us." And you responded in the only way a child really can. You adapted to survive. But at some point, children grow up. You become a teenager, a young adult, someone who starts to build your own connections, your own relationships, your own ideas of love and worth. For many people, there comes a momentous scene, a conversation, a breakup, a therapy session, somewhere they suddenly realize, wait, the way I learned to survive as a child is now hurting me as an adult. So here's what I'd really like to know. And I think a lot of people watching are wondering the same thing. Was there a particular turning point in your life, a moment, an event, or a relationship, when you realized that growing up without hearing I love you wasn't just a sad detail from your childhood, but something that was actively shaping and maybe even damaging the way you loved and allowed yourself to be loved as an adult?
Yeah, there was a turning point. And it didn't happen in my childhood. It didn't even happen in my teenage years. It hit me when I was 25, in a relationship I honestly thought would last. His name was Daniel. We met at work, started as friends, then grew into something more. He was warm, emotionally expressive, and he said, "I love you," the way other people say hello. It came naturally to him. Not dramatic, not heavy, just honest, like breathing. In the beginning, I thought it was sweet. But as the relationship deepened, something strange started happening inside me. Every time he said, "I love you," I felt uncomfortable, not in a cute, shy way, uncomfortable like a smoke alarm going off inside my chest. He would say it and I'd freeze. He would reach out for a hug and I'd stiffen. He would tell me he missed me and I'd feel pressure instead of warmth. I didn't understand it at first. I kept thinking, why am I reacting like this? He's not doing anything wrong. But something in me, something old, kept whispering that affection was dangerous, or that I didn't deserve it, or that it could disappear without warning. Meanwhile, Daniel started noticing. He'd say, "You never say it back," or, "Do you even feel anything when I say it?" And the worst part was, I did feel something, just not what I was supposed to feel. Instead of warmth, I felt panic. Instead of closeness, I felt the urge to retreat. One night, things finally cracked open. We were sitting on his couch after dinner. He looked tired, not physically tired, but emotionally drained. He asked me, "Emma, do you love me?" And Pat, I swear, my entire brain shut down, because in that moment, the question didn't feel like a question. It felt like a test, like something you could fail, like something that could be taken away. I remember staring at him and thinking, if I say yes, what if he expects more of me than I can give? What if I say it wrong? What if he stops loving me later and it hurts? What if I don't deserve to say it at all? All of those thoughts came from that quiet house I grew up in. The house where love was practical, silent, and unspoken. A house where feelings were like locked drawers, present, but inaccessible. So instead of answering, I said the worst possible thing. "I don't know." I saw something break in his face. Not anger, just sadness. A deep, exhausted sadness. He said, "I say I love you and you look like I'm hurting you. I'm trying to love you, but I can't tell if you want it." And Pat, I didn't know how to tell him that I did want it. I didn't know how to explain that wanting it and tolerating it felt like two different things. That night, after I went home, I sat in my car for almost an hour, and the sentence that kept repeating in my head was, "Why does love feel so scary to me?" That was the moment, the turning point. The moment I finally realized the silence I grew up with wasn't just silence. It was shaping me. It was shaping my relationships. It was shaping the way I received affection, the way I believed in it, the way I feared it. It wasn't just a detail from childhood, it was a blueprint, and that realization was both painful and freeing. Because once you recognize a pattern, you can finally decide whether you want to keep living inside it or start learning a new one.
Emma, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot in what you just said that I think many people will quietly recognize in themselves. What really stands out to me is this. On the surface, it looks like a simple relationship moment. One person says, "Do you love me?" And the other says, "I don't know." But underneath, there's a whole lifetime speaking. You're not just answering Daniel, you're answering every unspoken moment from your childhood. You're answering all the years where love meant doing, not saying. You're answering all the times you learned to lower your emotional needs just to keep the peace. A lot of people imagine that if you didn't hear "I love you" growing up, you just become someone who doesn't care about that stuff. But what you're describing is almost the opposite. You cared so much that the words felt dangerous, too big, too risky, too loaded. You said something very important. Wanting love and being able to tolerate love felt like two different things. That's a powerful insight because many adults walk around with that same split inside them. Part of them is starving for closeness. Another part is terrified of exactly the thing they're starving for. And often, they don't understand why they pull away when someone gets close, or why they freeze when someone says, I love you. From the outside, it might look like coldness, indifference, or commitment issues. But from the inside, it's really about survival strategies that were learned a long time ago in a very quiet house. I also want to highlight this line you said. The silence wasn't just silence, it was a blueprint. That's a profound realization. We tend to think trauma or shaping events have to be loud, obvious, explosive. But sometimes it's the absence that shapes us. The words not said, the hugs not given, the emotions not named. And then one day you're sitting on someone's couch being asked, do you love me? And all those invisible blueprints decide how you respond. So now that we've heard about that turning point, sitting on that couch, saying, I don't know, then sitting alone in your car wondering, why does love feel so scary to me? I want to move into reflection, not just what happened, but what you see now when you look back at it. Here's what I'd like to ask you. When you think about that version of yourself at 25, the Emma who couldn't say I love you, who felt panic instead of comfort when someone offered her love, how do you feel about her now? Do you judge her? Do you feel compassion for her? And what do you understand today about that moment that you didn't understand back then?
I feel very differently about her now than I did back then. At the time, if I'm honest, I mostly felt disgusted with myself. I remember going home that night after telling Daniel, I don't know, and thinking, how can you be this broken? Who doesn't know if they love their own boyfriend? Normal people don't freak out when someone says, I love you. I made it all about some kind of defect in me, like there was something fundamentally wrong with my wiring. Now, when I look back at that 25-year-old version of me, I don't see someone broken. I see someone confused and unprepared. No one had ever taught me the emotional language to match what I was feeling. I knew how to show up, how to be responsible, how to get good grades, how to be low maintenance. But no one ever taught me how to receive love without feeling like I was stealing it, or like I had to immediately prove I deserved it. Back then, I thought love was a performance review. If I said I love you back, it felt like signing a contract. Now I have to be perfect. Now I'm responsible for not disappointing you. Now there's something big I can mess up. I didn't understand that love could be safe, imperfect, messy, honest, something you grow into, not something you're already an expert at before you say the words. Today, when I think of that Emma on the couch, staring at Daniel, frozen and terrified, I actually feel a lot of compassion for her. Because she was trying to answer a question she had never been allowed to practice. Most kids grow up hearing, I love you as background noise. They say it back without thinking. It becomes familiar, like a song you've heard since birth. For me, those words were not familiar, they were foreign. They felt like using a tool I'd never held before, in front of an audience, while being graded on my form. So when I look back now, I don't see someone who failed a test. I see someone who was being asked to do emotional calculus when no one had ever taught her basic math. Another thing I understand now that I didn't understand then is this. My reaction was logical, given my past. If you grow up in a home where love is silent, where feelings are not spoken, where needs are downplayed, your nervous system learns a very specific lesson. Stay small. Don't ask for too much. Don't draw attention to your feelings. Then suddenly, you meet someone who looks you in the eyes and says, I love you, and means it, and repeats it, and asks you to say it back. Of course your system freaks out. Of course your brain goes, this is unfamiliar, therefore it might be unsafe. Of course your first instinct is to back away. That doesn't mean it's the right reaction. But it does mean it's an understandable one. If I could go back and sit next to that 25-year-old version of me on that couch, I think I would tell her something like this. You're not broken. You're inexperienced. There's a difference. You were not given the language of love, so of course you stutter when you try to speak it. You are not cold. You are scared. You are not incapable of love. You are learning what it is, in real time, in front of someone you're afraid to lose. Back then, I thought that moment with Daniel proved I was unlovable. Now, I see it as the moment I realized I needed to unlearn some things. I needed to unlearn that love is only chores and bills and showing up. I needed to unlearn that needing words makes me needy. I needed to unlearn that being emotionally impacted by love is a weakness. Today, I see that scene him asking, "Do you love me?" And me saying, "I don't know," as the beginning of my education, not the end of my chances. It was the first crack in the wall. The first time I saw that the way I'd been taught to survive was now getting in the way of the life I actually wanted. So, no, I don't judge her anymore. I hurt for her. I'm proud of her for at least noticing that something was off, even if she didn't yet know what to do about it. And I'm grateful to her, because the questions she started asking in that moment: why does love feel scary? Why do I freeze? Why can't I say it back? Those questions are the ones that eventually led me to therapy, to reflection, and to the version of me sitting here today, able to talk about it out loud instead of just silently living it.
Emma, thank you, not just for the honesty, but for the clarity. A lot of people spend their whole lives feeling what you've described, but never being able to put it into words. And tonight, you gave them language. You gave them reflection. You gave them permission to recognize themselves without shame. What I find so meaningful about your story is that it reminds us of something very simple, but very easy to forget. Not hearing "I love you" as a child doesn't make you unlovable. It makes you human. It makes you someone who learned to survive with limited tools and who now has the courage to learn new ones. Your journey shows that emotional patterns can be unlearned, blueprints can be rewritten, and silence from the past doesn't have to dictate the vocabulary of your future. To everyone watching, maybe tonight you recognized a piece of your own childhood. Maybe you saw yourself in Emma's panic, or in her shame, or in her silence. Maybe you realize that you've been loving people with the emotional tools of your younger self. If that's you, please remember, it is never too late to learn a new language of love. Never too late to speak words you didn't hear. Never too late to give yourself the softness you were never given. And never too late to say, "I love you," even if the first time feels shaky, unfamiliar, or slow. Emma, thank you for letting us sit with your story. Thank you for showing us that healing doesn't always start with a dramatic explosion. Sometimes it starts with a quiet question asked alone in a parked car. Why does love feel scary to me? And thank you for reminding us that fear is not the end of the story. Fear is the beginning of understanding. To everyone at home, thank you for joining us for another session around our kitchen table. We hope tonight's conversation stays with you, not to weigh you down, but to open something gently inside you. I'm Pat Sajak. This is Kitchen Table Talks. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.